One less gun is one less death, is what Carrot Sedlick stated in the Odyssey newspaper. When you look at the editorial, schools can keep kids safe without giving guns to teachers. It lacks a few prominent solutions that neither DeVos nor the editor realize. Gun control in America is not only an issue that pertains to school shootings, but mass murders that happen across our country. Both DeVos and the editor neglect the reality of the Vegas shooting and the post-club shooting and so many more. Their solution protects our children, but neglects adults who may live in fear of being harmed with a firearm. I will discuss how reform can benefit adults and children, how universal mental health care checks should not only be in schools, but within the community, and identifying mental health threats in our community can help adults and not just the youth, aka community outreach. So how can reform help adults and children? Well, the New York Times editorial argues that giving guns to teachers will not save our students, however, other means will do so. Of course, this is common sense because obviously if you place a firearm in a classroom, this can lead to violence, abuse, and instill fear among the students. However, the editor and Betsy DeVos treat school shootings as black and white. School shootings, however, go hand in hand with mass shootings. To combat one, you have to combat the other. So let's talk about 2012. An armed man walked into a school. The school name was Sandy Hook, where he proceeded to kill 26 people. This man was not a student, he was not a teacher, and he was at an elementary school. Nothing the editor said or Betsy DeVos proposed could have been used to combat this. In 2016, however, it was found that school shootings were less likely to happen when they were required intensive background checks. As of now, only 14 states require background checks. We go back to 2001, and Winnemute states that with a background check, you have a 25% decrease in firearm-related crimes. This means that adults with violent tendencies could not purchase a firearm, nor would kids who may be around adults with violent tendencies or may have parents who have adult tendencies wouldn't have easy access to these firearms. This could create a drop in mass shootings and school-related shootings at the same time. California, for example, passed the handgun law in 1991. This law gave them the ability to run background checks, intensive background checks. As a result, 1,654 people who applied for a gun, 927 were denied because they had some type of criminal past. So now we can talk about the universal mental health care checks. So in the editorial, the editor talks about schools needing more counselors to prevent mental breakdowns that may lead to violence. This is understandable because a school counselor's job is to prevent a child from going through any type of psychological or mental breakdown that can lead to violence. But when you put this same situation at Sandy Hook, the counselor has no defense against this. This is an adult male walking into an elementary school. He has no knowledge. So there's no way that he can prevent something like this from occurring. Mental health is a community issue. It's prominent in adults and youth alike. As a community, we need more than school counselors to combat those who wish to kill. We need guidance within our entire community. So when it comes to mental health care checks, right after Sandy Hook, New York decided to act and pass legislation for gun control. This required that mental health professionals would have to report anybody deemed a risk to themselves or to the community and would have to be checked into a clinic and watched. The law was unbiased, so it targeted adults and youth alike. Overall, this is more effective than a school counselor because a counselor's jurisdiction is within the schoolyard. He has no jurisdiction with adults. He has no ability to understand what adult is going through at that moment in time. So The law may have had ethical issues as you are reporting people, but there was a twist when Maryland passed a law as well. And with this law, it drew back on, reporting everybody, but instead they were able to seize and hold weapons and place these people discreetly into a mental care facility and still get them the help required so that there was no violence that could have been implemented on the community. The same thing with Indiana. They also passed a very similar law, and it was discreet. So it's similar to risk assessment, but instead of risk assessment only within the schoolyard, is risk assessment across the board so that we can prevent mass shootings in public places and mass shootings at school. So now we talk about community outreach. This was one thing that was left out by DeVos and the editor. Millions of Americans live with depression, anxiety, and attention problems, etc. It's a list of things that a lot of Americans live with that go untouched and unnoticed. And we neglect them and do not provide them with the tools to be successful. So school shootings, mass shootings, they all devastate communities. But the kicker is most time people in the communities, they see these signs and they write it off as a phase. It is time as a community to start having conversations about mental health. Parents, friends, neighbors, we have to reach out to prevent these escalating to a level we don't want to get to. The editor himself in the New York Times editorial provides support of only educators and increasing programs at school. How does this help when the child goes home? Or how does this help the adult who lives alone and he suffers day to day and he's by himself and his thoughts become irate? Research shows that early intervention can prevent significant mental health problems when developing. If the community can identify someone with an issue, we can prevent things like mass shootings happening. We also have to understand that universal screening for mental health problems is necessary to reach those who may fall through the cracks. So we can screen our youth, but if we neglect the adults, we still leave the problem on the board. It may not always be a child who chooses to shoot up the school. It can be an adult who chooses to shoot up the school. So if we're not combating both, the problem still remains unsolved. So in conclusion, school shootings are part of a much bigger problem that is happening in America. We have to tackle the entire problem of gun control and eliminate the roots if we want to see a change. We need to understand as a nation that the lives of adults matter as much as the youth. And without the community, we will not figure out a way to save everyone.